The tight end position is an absolute wasteland right now. There are very few options to choose from. Even the studs we were hoping to count on are underperforming. So I need your help. Hit that like button. Let's start a petition. Let's see if we can get all these fantasy sites just to allow us for the remainder of the season to put any position player we want to in our tight end spot. I mean, think about it. Especially in tough matchups like this week. Heck, I'd love to throw some Chubb in my tight end spot. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you're all doing well out there. Welcome back to the Draft.com studios, where today we're talking tight ends, the football kind. Here for Week 8 fantasy football, there are not a whole lot of options out there. If you get lucky enough to get a tight end that scores double-digit points, congratulations. There's very few of them out there. Now, before we get into the matchups here for Week 8, let's see how we did in Week 7 and all of the studs that totally killed our average. All right, so for the Week 7 numbers, you can see some big names that were misses here. 30 total tight ends given a start-sit designation that played this past week. 19 of them correct for an accuracy percentage of 63. The biggest hits, there weren't many because there's not many to choose from. Jared Cook, Luke Wilson, TJ Hawkinson, we had them all listed as sits last week. They all underperformed. The biggest misses, though, the ones that absolutely kill us, were the big names that you're going to start every week. George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, Mark Andrews. Heck, last week for the tight end position, there were only a total of 10 tight ends that had double-digit fantasy points. Kind of hard to knock it out of the park with that little of production. So let's see what we have here in Week 8. Hopefully there's some more options for us that can give us a legitimate starter here, at least for another week. Let's see what we can find out there and try to get those lineups set here for the weekend for this week's fantasy football matchups. All right, first matchup is going to be between the Washington Redskins, Minnesota Vikings, and I really don't think any of these guys see that 10-point threshold to be a start. Now, if I had to choose one out of this option, if I didn't have any other choices in my league, Irv Smith may be my choice here. He's a little bit more of an athletic tight end. Maybe can make a big play happen with no Adam Thielen. But as far as Kyle Rudolph and Jeremy Sprinkle, who just doesn't sound like a football player, I'm not interested in this week. They're highly touchdown dependent, not overly involved in their team's offense. Neither one of these teams give up more than 7 fantasy points a game to opposing tight ends. Like I said, if you're desperate, Irv Smith would be who I choose, but I'm not overly excited about any of these guys. Seahawks and Falcons up next, and you're automatically going to start Austin Hooper, one of the only fantasy tight ends that keeps producing on a weekly basis. And this is a fairly good matchup for him also. Right now, the Falcons giving up just under 10 fantasy points per game, one of the highest numbers in the league to the tight end position. So Austin Hooper is going to be another safe start. Luke Wilson is somebody who came back to Seattle that we maybe thought had some upside here because of the injury to Will Dissly. Well, Luke Wilson's had familiarity in this offense, and with Russell Wilson, it's just not going to be something that's going to be consistent on a weekly basis. I have a feeling Seattle's going to be able to throw the ball deep this week, down the field to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I don't see a whole lot of Luke Wilson, a lot of Chris Carson this week. He's just not somebody who's safe enough to start at this point. Broncos and Colts up next, and I mentioned in the wide receiver video that I was a little bit worried about the production possibly of T.Y. Hilton this week. I think Chris Harris has that ability to really limit his upside. Who may take those added targets, that added upside? I got Eric Ebron as a start this week. I think it's definitely somebody who could give you that fantasy boost that you may need. Right now, on average, the Broncos are only giving up just a little over 5 fantasy points a game. But like I said, with the added volume, could come the possibility of a red zone target or two for Eric Ebron. Going to go ahead and start him. Noah Fant could be a good start because really the Colts give up 9.3 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. The problem is Noah Fant isn't consistently involved in this offense, and I have a feeling they want to start to get Deshaun Hamilton acclimated to that number 2 spot going forward. He's the one who sees that uptick in targets. I'd like to start Fant, but I just can't. The other Colts tight end, and I haven't said this name in a long time, so you know what? It's overdue. I'm talking about Jack Motherfucking Doyle of the Indianapolis Colts. I really wish he could be more consistent. He's just not seeing that consistent volume on a weekly basis to give him that safe floor. The touchdown upside goes to Ebron. That's why Jack Doyle is sitting in the sit column. Bucks and Titans up next, and I would like to start Delaney Walker, but we really need to pay attention to his status. Suffered an ankle injury last week. Still unclear whether or not he plays this week. If he does, it's a great matchup because right now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers give up on average 11.3 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. We already know that Ryan Tannehill under center is able to get the ball down the field. Really got to pay attention to this health, though, of Delaney Walker. If he is not a full go here by the end of the week, he's going to end up moving towards the sit column. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you got O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, and really Cameron Brate stealing the touchdown upside. O.J. Howard really isn't doing a whole lot. However, it would not surprise me to see them try to get O.J. Howard a little bit more involved in this offense going forward. Now, right now, the Tennessee Titans allow just under 9 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but the problem is both of these guys are eating into each other's potential upside, and it's really killing their fantasy value altogether. They're both going to remain sits until one of them can separate themselves from the other. Cardinals and Saints up now, and you definitely want to start the opposing tight ends going against the Cardinals. Even though last week they limited Evan Engram, this week I'm going to go ahead and throw Jared Cook out there once again, going up against the Cardinals, who give up on average 16 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, the most in the NFL. There's limited options, right? We've been talking about that. Right now, you kind of got to look for that lottery ticket. It could be Jared Cook this week. Going to start him against Arizona. As far as the Cardinals go, Max Williams, the tight end there, is not somebody who's going to see a lot of targets, especially if Christian Kirk comes back. He just doesn't see enough volume, highly touchdown dependent. If he gets out there and gets 1 or 2 catches, you're excited about it, but that's not the type of floor that I'm looking for in a tight end here in Week 8. Bengals and Rams up next, and I'm going to go ahead and throw Gerald Everett out there. He's not what you would call consistent. However, he is getting more and more involved in this offense on a weekly basis. Now, the Bengals do not allow a whole lot of points to opposing tight ends. Right now, they only allow 5.5 points to opposing tight ends, but once they get in the red zone, it's Cooper Kupp and it's Gerald Everett that they're looking for. That touchdown upside is there, and we're hoping for it again this week. On the Bengals side of things, Tyler Eifert is not somebody who's going to be overly involved. I really don't like any of the weapons there for the Cincinnati Bengals. I expect Andy Dalton to be under heavy pressure the majority of the game from that defensive front of the Los Angeles Rams. He may be throwing a lot, but it doesn't mean they're catchable targets. I'm going to go ahead and sit Tyler Eifert of the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, basically completing the sweep here with pissing off the entire Philadelphia Eagles fan base. I don't like Zach Ertz this week. I really don't. Going up against the Buffalo Bills, who only allow 3.2 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And it's not like Zach Ertz is out there absolutely killing it this year. A lot of people disappointed with the production, and now a difficult matchup on the road. I'm sure you probably don't have better options, but as far as that 10-point threshold, I don't know if I see him getting it this week. If you have him, more than likely you're starting him, but you're limiting expectations and just crossing your fingers. For the Bills, Dawson Knox, it may be a decent matchup. I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles give up on average just over 7 fantasy points to tight ends, but there's other options there. I see them trying to establish the run game. It's a difficult run defense of the Philadelphia Eagles, but if they can establish some sort of running game, it's going to open things up on the outside for Cole Beasley, John Brown, for them to actually get a little bit of opportunity there on the outside. That's what I see more of this week, not so much of Dawson Knox. Chargers and Bears up now, and I'm going to start Hunter Henry. He really seems to be the most reliable option in the passing game right now for the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, Keenan Allen has struggled. Mike Williams has seen targets but hasn't really done a whole lot with it. Hunter Henry has that huge red zone upside, huge touchdown upside, can break a big play also across the middle of the field. If the defense is paying attention to the wide receivers on the outside, makes it a lot easier for the likes of Hunter Henry to expose them in the middle of the field. Not very many options that we've talked about, so we're starting Hunter Henry, of course. Now, Trey Burton, on the other hand, not somebody who's overly involved in his team's offense. Like I said in the quarterback video, Mitch Trubisky's out there throwing the ball 50 times a game, but not all of those pass attempts are catchable targets, so it doesn't really matter. They don't really have an identity in Chicago. Trey Burton really not a part of the game plan as of yet, and he's going to remain in the sit column. Giants and Lions up next. We're going to continue to start Evan Engram here, even though he had a poor week last week against the Arizona Cardinals, and their last-ranked defense against opposing tight ends really disappointed a lot of fantasy owners that were counting on a big day from Evan Engram. Going to give him another chance this week, though, with Saquon Barkley in the backfield. The only other option on the outside is Golden Tate. Darius Slayton hasn't really produced much. Sterling Shepard still not back from concussion issues. There's not a whole lot of options for Daniel Jones, and he's kind of been struggling as of late. I can see them, kind of committing more to the short to intermediate passing game, getting Evan Engram more involved, getting him the ball in space, and trying to take some of that pressure off of Daniel Jones. Going to start Evan Engram still. TJ Hawkinson, though, too inconsistent at this point. I think that so many targets go the way of Marvin Jones and and Kenny Golladay, and now with the run game of Ty Johnson, J.D. McKissick, I don't see a whole lot of opportunity for T.J. Hockenson. He may be touchdown dependent. If you have no better options, maybe you're in a 12-team league or larger, he may be one of the only choices you have. Right now, though, the Giants only give up 5 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, one of the few areas where they're pretty good on defense with, so I'm trying to avoid T.J. Hockenson if at all possible. Jets and Jags this week, not starting either of these guys. There's a good chance that Chris Herndon comes back this week, but it's something we need to pay attention to. However, even if he plays, I don't want to start him. I want to give him at least a week with Sam Darnold to get back in the flow of the game plan, get back up to game speed before we really trust him in the tight end spot. Jeff Swain just isn't involved in his team's offense at this point. There's a chance that he is in the future, maybe when Nick Foles returns. Nick Foles has had a tendency to look for his tight ends in the past. That's an opportunity, but it's a few weeks down the road. As of right now, both of these guys are going to be sits. Panthers and Niners up next, and we're going to start George Kittle, obviously, right? I mean, you probably don't have a whole lot of better options, but this isn't a horrible matchup for him. Now, there is a new target in town, Emmanuel Sanders, but whether he really sees the field or not kind of remains to be seen this week. Maybe going forward, that affects the production of George Kittle, but right now, he's still the top receiving threat in this offense. Keep your fingers crossed. Hope he can break that 10-point barrier this week. On the other side, though, Greg Olsen going against this defense of the San Francisco 49ers, which only allows just over 2 fantasy points per game. I don't want to tempt it. I mean, this defense is something that you really want to try to avoid on a weekly basis if you have no better options. At this point, Greg Olsen may not be your number 1 tight end. Look for other options. Maybe even Irv Smith is somebody I'd rather take a chance on than Greg Olsen this week. Raiders and Texans up now, and you're obviously going to start Darren Waller, the top receiving threat for the Oakland Raiders here all season long. The guy has played absolutely great, but this isn't a great matchup for him. Right now, the Texans are only giving up on average 5 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But Darren Waller sees the volume to make up for that, double-digit targets on a weekly basis, and he constantly has the eye of Derek Carr. He's going to remain in the start column. Now, on the Texans side of things, this could be a great matchup because right now the Raiders allow just over 10 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. The problem is both Fells and Akins kind of eat into each other's upside. It's kind of hard to pick which one is going to have the better game. It could literally be either one of them. And if that's the case, I try to avoid those situations. Yeah, the points may be there at the end of the day, but which one gets it? It's a crapshoot that I'm not willing to take. Browns and Patriots up next, and I'm not touching either tight end in this game right here. Ricky Seals-Jones, not one of these elite, consistent tight ends that you may not have a choice on throwing out there. But if I have a chance to avoid the defense of the New England Patriots, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to be benching Ricky Seals-Jones. The Patriots only allow just over 2 fantasy points per game to the tight end position, so he's not going to be an option for me. Now, Ben Watson was somebody that I kind of contemplated on, but there's a lot of options right now in New England. Does Mohamed Sanu see the field this week? That's a possibility. We already know about Julian Edelman and Philip Dorsett, Jacoby Myers, James White. They command a lot of targets and a lot of attention. There's a chance that Ben Watson kind of gets to be like the fourth wheel here. Kind of gets left out at times. And for that reason alone, I'm going to sit him this week. Let's see how they use him going forward. He is somebody who down the stretch could have that safe floor value, even if it's only 5 to 7 points. Look at the tight end position right now. 5 to 7 points is almost welcomed at this point. So keep an eye on Ben Watson, not somebody who I'm going to start this week, even though the Cleveland Browns do give up on average 8.5 fantasy points per game. Packers and Chiefs here. I'm going to start both Jimmy Graham and Travis Kelce here. Obviously, if you have Kelce, you spent an early round pick on him, you're going to start him. But with Matt Moore, it's not ideal. The opposing defense here of the Green Bay Packers only gives up on average 8 fantasy points per game. But kind of like I just said, 8 fantasy points at this point is welcomed. He is going to be a big red zone threat for Matt Moore if they can get inside the red zone, that big-bodied athletic tight end. They can go up there and get that ball and try to make things happen for Matt Moore to take off some of the pressure. Travis Kelce is going to be a start. Now, Jimmy Graham, highly touchdown dependent, but it sounds like there's not going to be Devontae Adams back again this week, which kind of always boosts that touchdown upside for Jimmy Graham on a weekly basis. Right now, Kansas City only allowing 7 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. So Jimmy Graham is a risk, but another guy with that touchdown upside that I'm going to put in the start column. Monday Night Football, Dolphins and Steelers, and I'm going to start Vance McDonald once again. Now, a lot of people were excited about Vance McDonald coming into the season, myself included. Then the injuries to Ben Roethlisberger and then Mason Rudolph went out. It's kind of been an issue. Vance McDonald dealt with his own injuries, but now he's back with Mason Rudolph. And when Mason Rudolph took over this job, when Ben Roethlisberger went out, one of his favorite targets for that short amount of time was Vance McDonald. So I do expect him to be a little bit more involved in this offense going forward if he can stay healthy. Plus, they're playing the Dolphins. You start everybody against the Dolphins. They're giving up right now only 7 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but I like the chances of Vance McDonald this week. On the other side, Mike Gesicki. Now, they do want to throw the ball a lot in Miami. There's not much of a run game there, despite the Mark Walton truthers out there. They're going to have to throw, but Mike Gesicki not overly involved in the passing offense. Majority of the targets going the way of fantasy Bigfoot, Devontae Parker, Preston Williams. Those guys are really eating up the bulk of those targets, and Mike Gesicki is kind of an afterthought at this point. Doesn't have that week-to-week touchdown upside and is going to remain a sit for me here in Week 8. All right, those are my starts and sits for the tight end position here, Week 8 fantasy football. Let me know what you think down below. Make sure you hit that like button and the subscribe button. Greatly appreciate the support. The channel's still growing like crazy, and we couldn't do it without you, the viewer out there. Make sure you go check out the video link down below where we're giving away $1,000. All you got to do is leave a comment on a video, and you're entered for the drawing on October 31st. Greatly appreciate you guys' support. Hopefully you have a great rest of your week, a great weekend, and we look forward to talking to you here in just a few days.